Welcome into episode 372 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian D. Felice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, Joe Sacco gets his first win as Boston Bruins head coach. The Bruins win 1-0 over the Utah Hockey Club at TD Garden. As bad as the Bruins have played this year, strangely, they have 3 shutouts to their credit. Philly, Seattle, and now Utah. All 3 shutouts coming after immense criticism surrounding the team. So one would call those bounce back performances. Bridget and Scott, before you guys give your opening shifts pertaining to the game, I'll give mine quickly because it has to do with something that took place before, which was Don Sweeney meeting with the media in the wake of firing Jim Montgomery. And one of the comments that he made piqued my interest because the comments alone, the possibility of what he's talking about is something that, I don't think Bruins teams in the past ever really had to deal with very often. So I'll just read you the quote that he said at this press conference, and forgive me for not knowing the reporter who asked the question in the moment or how this all played out. But the quote was, "We're going to identify the guys that love being here, love representing the Boston Bruins. And if they don't, then I'll make some changes as a result of that, and performance will drive it." So that comment to me is interesting because I look at this Bruins team, and if there are any players who indeed don't want to be Bruins, it's interesting to me because it's an original 6 franchise, as everybody learned last year, with a 100+ year history, a wonderful sports city to play in, if not the best. Some of the most passionate fans in the league, if not the best. The last couple of years, they've had a player-friendly coach and a lot of success as a team and a lot of success as individuals. Many fans out there would say individuals that had career highs that they ordinarily would never hit again. So to hear that there could possibly be players to identify that don't want to be a Bruin, it's like, for what possible reason? But in any event, it piqued my interest. It's something to follow. If struggles continue, the Bruins are going to be willing to make changes. Last night was not one of those performances, and so I'll throw it over to you guys.
Yeah, and I, as Brian alluded to, we're definitely going to get into some of the reaction to Don Sweeney's press conference, since we haven't had a chance to talk about that yet. But yeah, my opening shift is about Joe Sacco's first game and the Bruins hitting the reset button with a 1-0 win over Utah, which it doesn't, if you just look at that, it doesn't look super impressive on paper. Utah had been struggling. I think they're now 3-8-2 in their last 13. But this was a good game, and there were good signs. There were positive developments. Above everything else, the Bruins played with more energy, emotion, urgency. Joe Sacco said after the game, "We were looking for the passion and the emotion in our club, and we saw some of that here tonight." And he's exactly right. There was. You had Mark Kastelic dropping the gloves twice. You had a lot of guys playing physical. You had guys forechecking, back checking hard, winning battles. And especially on the power play, you saw a ton more urgency in terms of a shot first mentality. They had 18 shots on goal on 7 power plays. Now they only score on the 1, so you still got to convert more. But just seeing that many shots get to the net is such a positive development for this team. On a per minute basis, they basically had twice as many shots Thursday night on the power play as they had been averaging prior to that. So that was a huge step in the right direction. I think if the power play plays like that, it will start scoring more. It'll be better than 1 for 7. And that can go such a long way. You even saw within this game that even early on when they didn't score, it built positive momentum. It got the crowd into it. You actually had the crowd at the Garden cheering after a power play, which is like, oh yeah, that's a thing that can happen.
Not the first one.
Yeah, we've gotten so used to hearing boos after every power play.
Well, there was still boos after the first power play because it didn't look good. But then the Bruins ended up with 7 power plays, so they eventually started. The second one was the beginning of where things started to look better. But the first one looked like more of the same. There was a bad turnover, and
yeah,
they were booing after the first one, Scott.
Into it more. I kind of disagree. I thought they were good signs, even then. And then the second one was
yeah. I'm saying that the fans were booing.
Some, not nearly as loud as it had been.
I still can hear it pretty easily.
But anyways, that much better effort overall, and a good first step that the Bruins now have to build on, which has been a problem for this team all year. But that was a night that they needed.
Yeah, and so there was plenty more to kind of talk about, because there was a power play goal from Elias Lindholm, who looked like he was, genuinely just relieved and excited, and you could just watch their facial expressions. And there's a moment where he scores and he just kind of looks up to the sky, and you can tell that meant a lot to him. And maybe for even individual players, it's a step in the right direction for certain habits or just confidence. Because, Lindholm for sure feels like one of them. And then there were others we can get into as well. But my opening shift has to do with goaltending, because Korpisalo comes in, stops all 21 shots, gets his second shutout of the season, looks like passes the eye test for sure. Made some saves that looked very difficult. I don't know. After watching Swayman for his 14 games and watching Korpisalo for his 8 games, it's pretty clear to see that Korpisalo is coming up with some timely saves, and some that are difficult, and he's doing a good job. And it looks like that under goalie coach Bob Essenza, he is getting back on track from his down year last year in Ottawa, and he is kind of creeping up in what he's doing. The first game of the season, I thought he looked shaky, but ever since then, he's gotten better, and he's won 3 of the last 4 games he's started. He also, the other game wasn't a regulation loss, it was an overtime loss. The Bruins still got a point in that game. So he's leading the Bruins to more points towards the standings right now. I mean, he has 1 fewer win than Swayman, but his win percentage is above 500, where Swayman's is below. I think his record is 4-2-1, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head, or 4-2-2, something like that. And he is starting to make you ask the question, could he really challenge Swayman for the number 1 role? Or at least could it be more like last year, 1A, 1B, and take some of the pressure off Swayman? Because maybe that's an issue that he's been having with being like the guy with the big contract and being the number 1 without, that duo, that tandem of the last 2 years with Ullmark. So, I mean, at the very least, it's only a positive for the Bruins if Korpisalo can keep playing like this. It drives goalie competition. It maybe gives you a little bit more of a idea that you can trust him to give Swayman rest if that's what works best for the team. And I don't know. I think it's been a good thing. And we talked about it when Korpisalo came in the other direction to Boston with the Ullmark trade, and Scott and others. And, I think we all were thinking, oh, that was kind of a throw-in, but who knows? Maybe the value could be pretty high for the Bruins to have Korpisalo if he plays like this. It would be a good addition, as well as Kastelic, because we were talking all about the first round pick. First round pick, then that turns into Dean Letourneau. That's what they wanted. Well, they got Kastelic, who sparked the energy last night, and they got Korpisalo, who got them the win. And in a game that, though it's just another regular season game, felt pretty important.
Oh, it most certainly was. And yeah, Bridget, Korpisalo wasn't the only NHL player in that deal to come to Boston that people were calling a throw-in, to your point. So at the time, I feel like the fan base was kind of 50-50 on the Ullmark trade, because there were many fans who just, wanted them to do what needed to be done anyway. But the return, history may say the Bruins may have strongly won that deal. If Letourneau turns into something great, if Korpisalo is, strong while he's here, if Kastelic turns into like a fan favorite. So yes, all good points. I think jumping back, just a place we can probably start with the game in general is
I actually want to start. I actually want to go into Korpisalo more. Like, I think there's like a lot of meat here.
I wrote about it last night, so go ahead.
Yeah,
read it.
I mean, of the three goalies like involved in this whole shuffle, Swayman and Ullmark needing to be split up for money, Korpisalo being involved in the deal. Korpisalo's been the best of the three by a lot this season. Like, he has definitely outplayed Swayman. And in case people haven't been following, Linus Ullmark is really struggling up in Ottawa. He has not been good. That whole team has not been good.
It's almost like the guys out in front of him were making Korpisalo look worse last year.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely something to that, for sure. Korpisalo was not good. Like, I'm not going to let him off the hook. He needs to be a hell of a lot better than he was last year. But yeah, it doesn't help when you're playing behind that team that doesn't play defense. Now, the Bruins at times this season have also not played defense, so that's probably been a little familiar to him, and maybe that's a little more unusual for Swayman. But
yeah, one of them seems to be handling it better.
Yeah. Yeah, Bridget, like you mentioned, maybe taking some pressure off Swayman, and in the sense of workload, you're right.
Yeah.
Even better, though, it puts pressure on Swayman to step up his performance because he needs to. And yeah, like Korpisalo is pushing him for more playing time. I'll just ask you guys right here. Who do you start Saturday in Detroit?
I'd probably go Korpisalo. I think it's worth sending a message too. That like if you win, you're gonna get looks. Like if you're playing up to par, like you could win your time or lose your time.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking about the Detroit game specifically, which you are, yeah, I would go with Korpisalo. I think that Jeremy Swayman, regardless of his contract number, like you have to earn your playing time, and he hasn't been good enough. Now, at what point do you give him a chance to be good enough? Of course, like I think far more likely than Korpisalo becoming a number one goalie is something that Bridget mentioned earlier, I believe, which was just maybe a platoon like Jeremy Swayman is used to. But I'll be honest, I think that like heading into the season, I do think that, and again, this kind of ties into some of the Sweeney stuff that they were talking about in the press conference. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of the bad energy around this team started back in the summer. Like if you turned on sports radio in August, talking heads were complaining about Swayman wanting more than he's worth when he went on that podcast, the Shut Up Mark podcast, talking about the goalie market and knowing his value and stuff and his comps. That kind of started like a negative narrative in the city around the team. It drags into training camp. You have all these players who are skating on the ice, but they're kind of guilty by association because the Bruins are this soap opera for the team, for the league. And these guys have nothing to do with the negotiations. And then you had players that are injured and coming off of surgery. So the Swayman drama definitely attributed, in my opinion, to some of the bad energy around the team heading into opening night. So beyond his play not being where it needs to be, I just think that he, a little bit of humble pie isn't going to hurt the kid. And I think that if that means starting Korpisalo when he's playing well and sending a message like Bridget mentioned, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think they're still trying to like settle into a new dynamic because you come in with a plan to start the season, but I guess that plan might not be the best fit for, what they need, which was supposed to be, Swayman finally getting like a true number one time in net, like game share wise. Well, and this was a criticism that came in and was one of the things that people said about why he shouldn't get, or I'm sure Sweeney and the Bruins organization were arguing that the reason why he shouldn't get that big $8+ million number was because he had not done it yet. And how, like, would he be able to do it? And that was a question that he could have put to bed with starting out playing the same way he's done in his career and handling the workload. But we're not even that far into the workload, and it seems like maybe something about it is just not working. And it could, maybe maybe we're talking too much about the goalies, and maybe it's bigger. The defensive issues are bigger, or there's just so much that goes into it. But I think they're reevaluating what they thought about their goalie plan right now.
Yeah, I mean, they gave Swayman a chance to have a bigger workload. Like, he was getting 3-4 straight starts pretty much that was kind of how the rotation, or whatever you want to call it, was working. It was like 3 or 4 starts for Swayman, 1 for Korpisalo, 3 or 4 for Swayman, and it was going like that. And and I wrote about this over the weekend, before Swayman's bad game against Columbus, and before the coaching change and all that. And Swayman's numbers, in his 3rd or 4th consecutive start, he has an .847 save percentage. Like, he was actually pretty solid in his 1st or 2nd start after a game off, until the Columbus game, which was first game after a game off, and he was still really bad. But yeah, so already I thought it was time to get him down to 1 or 2 consecutive starts and get Korpisalo more involved, because Korpisalo's earned it. And yeah, to answer my own question, I would go back to him on Saturday, because it's a message 2 ways, right? Obviously it'd be a message to Swayman that hey, you're going to have to battle for playing time, and you haven't earned it just yet. But it's also a positive message to Korpisalo and to the rest of the team that if you play well and you step up, you're going to get rewarded with more games and more ice time, whatever it might be. And to me, that's only a good message to send to your entire team. And Swayman gets that same message is, hey, if you earn it and you start playing better, then you'll be the one getting 2, 3, 4 straight starts. You'll get back to that. You're just not there right now.
Can I ask you guys a question? I'm curious what your feedback is. There's an argument out there that goaltending, the position of goaltending, is the most important position in hockey, but that the goaltenders that play that position, it's overrated who that can be. I think the gist behind that argument is that while the position is extremely important, unlike a first line center where you're probably getting that in a top a top pick in the draft or a first rounder, in all likelihood, goaltenders come out of the woodworks. Linus Ullmark, for example, is a 6th round draft pick. Jeremy Swayman is a 4th round draft pick out of Hockey East. Jordan Binnington came out of the woodworks. He was a 3rd round draft pick for St. Louis, comes in, wins a cup. I'm not sure who the goaltender was in Vegas. I forget his name at this point. Hill.
Aiden Hill.
I'm not sure what his draft status was, but in general, it's not every year. It's more often than not that a Stanley Cup winning goaltender is, a non, highly touted goaltender heading into the league, or
it happens, but you also have Sergei Bobrovsky wins last year. He's on a big contract.
And Vasilevsky.
Andrei Vasilevsky won.
No, I know. I know.
I think it's closer to a 50-50 split.
Well, but that's why, and I know it is, and that's Brodeur, Waugh. I mean, if you go back 25 years, there are a lot of examples of those higher end goalies, but there's also, to your point, Scott, it's a split. So I guess that's why I'm asking the question, can the individual who's, can it be a little bit overrated, to have to pay for that top end goalie, or I'm just asking you guys a question.
Well, I think it's an incredibly important position. Whether or not you have to invest the money, you just need to know you have the guy, right? A guy that can handle it, a guy that can perform. And I think it's such an important position. You watch what happens in other cities when they have goalies that you're looking at them and this is what happens. Fan bases are, one night they're excited and happy and everything's going great and the goalie plays well, and then the next night it's inconsistent, right? You need a guy that can be consistent at the very least. And I think we don't understand necessarily because we've never been there. This would be something like Razor could speak to. In order to even make the NHL, you have to be pretty freaking good. Like, you can't be just like the level. And by the way, this is true, I think, in a lot of leagues. Goaltenders are ahead of a lot of players. Like, a lot of goalies are ahead of the curve in terms of like what they can do, right? Like, if you can stop Connor McDavid, that makes you like one in a million person. Like, if you can stop Connor, like, it's just, I think it's very important. I think you can't just have like a guy, and you want to have somebody that your team feels comfortable having behind them and like giving you an honest chance to actually to make a playoff run.
Yeah, what I would say is if you have a team that has enough overwhelming talent elsewhere, you can maybe overcome not having the best goalie, right? Like, that's when the Avs won, Darcy Kemper was basically an average goalie, and that was a team that was loaded everywhere else. You are not built that way. You do not have a Nathan McKinnon or a Cale Makar that you can build your team around. I would also add that when the Avs then moved on from an average goalie, they have not found an even average goalie since then, and they have been sunk by goaltending. That is the other possibility, is if you can't find a goalie who's at least good enough, you miss opportunities. Like, we could be talking about an Avalanche dynasty right now if they were settled in net. They're not, so we're not talking about that. It's a tough game to play. Yes, every now and then someone wins the lottery and hits on a hot goalie who comes out of nowhere. It is tough to rely. It is. Well, Tim Thomas won the best in the 2 years before.
I mean, like, his journey starting in Boston, he was already, like, you know what I mean, further in his career.
Sure, but by 2011 he was established. Yeah. It's not like the Bruins just plucked a random goalie for cheap out of free agency. Like,
no, but they were trying to hitch their wagon to Hannu Toivonen as their franchise guy before Timmy Thomas came from Swedish Elite League or wherever he was.
Yeah, so like I said, like, every now and then, you can be the Avs or Vegas and hit it just right, or Carolina back in the day with Cam Ward. But you could also be the team that gets to the end and gets 850 goaltending in a series and realizes, shit, we never had a goalie and we never found one, and now our season's over.
Yeah, and I guess the impetus to my question is because right now we're talking about being in favor of continuing to go back to Joonas Korpisalo right now, as opposed to Jeremy Swayman, and that Joonas Korpisalo is playing better this year than both Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark, both goalies who were top 10 goalies in the NHL last year that made up the best goalie duo in the league last year. And all I heard from everybody after the Ullmark trade was that Joonas Korpisalo was the worst goalie in hockey last year. And by the numbers, I think he was. But my point is that same player is now outperforming the goalies from last year and is now being questioned as, should he start for the Bruins going forward? So that's kind of why I'm like, okay, like, can you get creative and find a guy and have a reclamation project? Like, that's kind of why I'm saying, like, yes, Bridget, the position is the most important. Who plays that position? Again, like, do you have to allocate all as much of your salary cap to them as maybe some of the teams do? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just being devil's advocate.
Yeah, well, and just thinking back to like when Ullmark came in, like, his numbers were crap in Buffalo because it was Buffalo, and
they weren't as bad as Korpisalo's, though.
No, they weren't. But a lot of times, like, you end up in a situation that part of it's out of your control, and you're on a bad team or you're in a bad situation, and when you're put in a position to succeed, like, what can you do here? Like, this is a great opportunity for Korpisalo. He probably has the best goalie coach in the league. I mean, Baba Senza is held to the highest regard in terms of goalie coaches, and for good reason. Look what he's been able to do. I mean, there's been a lot of great goalies that progressed through the Bruins, and Swayman has been one of them. But if there's any place that he can get right and get back to his potential, which maybe he was below last year, and maybe lack of confidence in the team could have been part of it. Like maybe part of it was mental, and he feels more comfortable here. Like if he's able to best his what he's doing right now is he's besting his career numbers, and I don't see why that he can't keep doing it. It's not like I don't think he's playing like to a level that he can't keep up with. Like, do you guys watch him on the ice in the last few games that he's won and think, oh, he can't replicate that? Because I feel like he can. So I don't think he's playing like, oh, he's going to come way back down to earth. Like maybe his stats come closer to the average of his career, a little bit more, but I don't see why he can't keep playing like this. It just feels like he's on the right track and he's made progress and he can continue to be right in that range.
Yeah, I mean, he's been an inconsistent goalie in his career, so that would be the concern. Like he's had highs. He's on a high right now. In the past, he has not been able to sustain it long term. So we'll see, right? Like we're talking about, a good Bridget. What are we saying? Like 7 games basically has been good since opening night, or 6, whatever he's played.
Yeah, he's played 8 games total, but yes, he's since opening night. His most recent 4 games in particular were probably his best, but yeah, he's had 6 games since opening night.
Yeah, so like let's see. Like I'm not right. Like we're not talking about hey, if they make the playoffs, is Joonas Korpisalo starting game 1? Like we are many, many months away from that.
Well, you don't want to do goalie playoff talk?
But like, really, but like right now, like the conversation we're having right now is he's playing better than Swayman right now. So do you give him a second straight start, or do you start to platoon them until Swayman gets going? Because my expectation is still, when we get to the end of the season, Swayman will be the better goalie. Like that's what I expect. I think everything in both of these goalies' track records tells me that Jeremy Swayman is a better goalie, but he's just not playing better right now, and like that happens.
Well, Scott, maybe Jeremy Swayman having a luxury of having the Wizard of Oz, aka goalie coach Bob Essenza, by his side throughout his career has been an advantage that Korpisalo hasn't had to this point. But in all sincerity, I think Bridget, to your question about Korpisalo sustaining it, I think I don't think he's been out of this world. But I do think he's been positionally sound, and I do think a lot of that is coming from goalie Bob, and I think that's something that can, that should be sustainable.
Yeah, at the very least, his last 4 games, he's played similarly, and at a similar level. So
now, all that said, if we want to now expand to the rest of Thursday night's game, I will say that as far as shutouts go, that was one of the easier ones. Among the many other things that they did better, the Bruins were good defensively. They did not give up a lot of high danger chances. They gave up very little off the rush, which is like an important change, because in that game in Utah likes to play fast. They like to go, and they got chances off the rush the last time these teams played. Bruins gave them nothing. Like they slowed them down through the neutral zone. Bruins are on guys. They were pressuring pucks. Their forwards were getting back and were in position, which is like, it's basic, but it's just something that this team has not done on any kind of consistent basis this year. So that was good to see. It allowed their defensemen to, Brian, I think you showed this in a tweet that you had, like their gap control was so much better. They were not giving up the easy entries that we've been seeing them give up. And that's, yes, part of that is the defenseman being able to do that, but you're able to do that because the forwards are there to help.
Exactly, Scott. Yeah, like if your forwards aren't back, you're going to give up more space because you want to avoid getting beat one-on-one, and so you give yourself that extra buffer so you don't get beat. When your forwards are back, you have the confidence to gap up, and if you get beat, your forwards are right there. And I think that was a team-wide thing last night. Now, my question is, I think it's a question of everybody, is how much of this was because of the first game under a new coach effect? And I think that's the burning question we have. A couple weeks ago, whenever it was, they had that comeback win against St. Louis, and Scott and I sat here and said, look, it wasn't pretty, but sometimes it just takes a shitty feel-good win to get going. And Bridget, being the voice of reason, said, well, they sucked throughout the rest of the game, so it's not going to be as easy to carry it over if we're going just based off of how they played. And Scott and I didn't disagree with that, but it was just kind of like, yeah, but sometimes it's just the feel-good emotion that can help anything. I think last night's the opposite. Last night, we're not sitting here saying that they're going to carry it over from just good emotions, because they have that, but they actually played the right way for the majority of the game. Scott just illustrated a lot of those reasons. And so their ability to carry that forward should be more likely, more probable than them carrying it forward from the St. Louis game based on how they played throughout the majority of the contest. Again, is that a shampoo effect from, okay, we got to come out, hair on fire because the whole city is watching us under a new coach? What would that say about us if we come out flat? There's a bit of pride that I think went into last night. Does that carry forward for multiple games, weeks, months? That's what we have to find out. And it starts going forward.
Yeah, and I think this was talked about. So I asked Sacco and Marchand about it. About like the actual tone of like, and I asked Korpisalo about it too. Like when you came back to the locker room and during the intermissions and after the game, like what was the feeling? What was, was it a different energy? And it seemed like across the board it was. And what Sacco said at the end of his answer was it was alive. Like it had been dead before. Like it at least was lacking a certain life to it. And now maybe that's back. And we talked about how Montgomery probably wasn't at the top of the list of reasons why the Bruins hadn't got off to a good start, but he was the sacrificial lamb. Well, this is why you do a coaching change.
Did you say Sacco official?
I kind of did on accident.
That was very creative, very clever.
But you caught me there. But this is why you do it. It's like a kick in the ass. It is sometimes done, and unfortunately for coaches, and they understand that this is what happens. Like when all else fails, and you need energy, and you need to just change something, this is what you do. And we're very early into the Sacco era. At the very least, he got that first win. Marchand gave him the puck after the game, said, congrats, you only get your first win as a Bruins head coach once. And it does feel like the team has bought in, and you see the benefits of it. And Scott started to talk about this earlier, and I think this is where we should go next, which is you need the coaching staff to get players in the right position and set up for success on the power play, more so than they were for whatever reason under Montgomery. Like players need to be buying into what they should be doing on special teams, and that could make a huge difference. And we haven't gotten complete answer yet as to what changes are being made on those units, and because I think they're still feeling it out. But over time, we'll get more of an answer to what changes are made. And Merkulov was on the first power play unit. That I don't think is going to be a permanent change, but there was
wasn't permanent even for one game. So.
No, it wasn't. But anyway, I talk about special teams now.
Yeah, I think we saw some notable changes, like some of the quick fixes we already saw implemented, and one was moving Merkulov up to start, and I thought he looked pretty good. Now, the third power play that they got, maybe Sacco would have changed it anyways, but Merkulov had been on for a really long shift right before it, and there was no TV commercial. So I think he'd been on for over a minute. So he was coming off no matter what. So Zacha started that one, and then that power play looked good, and then he just stuck with Zacha there. But we saw, whether it was Merkulov or Zacha, they were on the right elbow. Marchand moved down to more of a net front or like doorstep spot, lower in the zone. which we saw pay off on the goal because Pasternak fakes a one-timer, sends a slap pass to Marchand on the back door, and that creates the rebound for Elias Lindholm to bury. So we've seen that a little bit at times, right? Like at times this year, we've seen Marchand shift down. It was much more of like the set formation this game. We saw them make much better use of Elias Lindholm in the bumper than they had recently. In fact, earlier this season, like Elias Lindholm was there in the bumper, and they seemed like so incapable of getting him the puck or doing anything with that spot that they actually started moving Elias Lindholm out of the bumper just to get him touches. Like he would either go to the elbow or even back to the point just to get on the puck a little bit. On Thursday, you saw them getting him the puck in the bumper and then him making things happen from there, whether it was getting it to the net or working it back to an elbow. I think we saw fewer drop passes through the neutral zone on entries, which, again, like that play can work. I'm not totally opposed to the drop pass. They just were too reliant on it and it got too predictable. So they changed that up and they got some better entries. So I think, all those definitely stand out as like the quick fixes. And now if there's going to be anything bigger, more systematic, like we'll see that in the weeks to come.
Yeah, Scott, I'm glad you brought up that last point about the lack of drop passes in the neutral zone, because that's where the power play starts. Obviously, power play starts in the O-zone with an O-zone face-off, and hopefully you win that. But let's call it 50% of the time you lose it and they ice it. So you got to start from scratch. And the Bruins definitely made an effort to go with more speed. And the problem with the drop pass in the neutral zone, to your point, Scott, you can't always go to that because it's too predictable. It's kind of similar to like in football, you have to, you got to set up the play action with some runs, right? You can't just go play action all the time because people will figure it out. Like you can't do anything all the time. People will figure it out. So you have to set it up and then to the point where people aren't expecting it. And when they're not expecting it, then you go for it. Joe Sacco made some comments after the game about, and forgive me if one of you guys already just mentioned this, but he mentioned how as the PK coach for the Bruins, he knows what they hate facing as a unit. And that is, power plays that are, aggressive, power plays that are, kind of like caving in the O-zone, like, being on inside ice and getting pucks through and retrieving them, and obviously having motion. And he talked about how, as opposed to being stationary on the outside and all these things. So, it's one of those things where like, do you want to bring in a genius offensive mind to help open up the power play, or do you want somebody who knows what it takes to defend it? And that's Joe Sacco on the PK. And so hopefully he could bring a perspective that is unique. And the obvious response to that is, well, Brian, he's been on the coaching staff for 10 years and he's on the coaching staff under Monty. Like, it's not like these guys don't talk and have ideas. And that's true. I just think maybe there's just an element of not wanting to step on toes when you're an assistant or associate head coach. And when you're the head coach, maybe you just implement things that you would otherwise do if you were in that position before. And yeah, in zone, just think, I've talked about it before, but I don't like Marchand on his offside on that offside wall. He's on a one-time threat, and I don't think he's the type of player that makes plays when he's stationary. Marchand needs to be going. So get him down by the net mount, allow him to just be a little honey badger, and that's what he does best, honestly. And then I like giving Pavel Zacha some creativity on that half wall to kind of play with Pasternak. So obviously, I really want to see Pasternak at times on his strong side half wall, which they did do at least one rep in Joe Sacco's first practice as head coach, which was good to see. I don't really think it was implemented in game against Utah, but you can see that they're mixing things up in zone and on the entries. And I mean, what else could you really ask for? They're trying to make changes, and it looked much better.
Yeah, and I think that, so like, to talk about the coaching part of it, I think that maybe the reason why it hadn't changed so far, like during Sacco's time in his 11 years with the Bruins, was like it didn't necessarily seem like it needed it, and then all of a sudden, more recently, it started not working anymore, and then then you need a solution, so you got to potentially make a drastic change, and that could include the guys, the coaching staff's roles changing, because that's one thing that Sacco mentioned in his press conference was, maybe he doesn't do the penalty kill anymore, and maybe everybody changes what they're doing a little bit, and obviously also Sweeney mentioned potentially bringing in someone else to complement them. So it's definitely not settled right now whose role it is to do any of those things, because they're trying to figure out where different responsibilities lie now. And except for Bob Essenza, I think he'll continue to be the goalie coach. But but yeah, like those things are changing, and they're having conversations about who can handle what, and trying to figure out maybe better ways to get things going, especially in special teams. But
yeah,
go ahead.
And Don Sweeney mentioned like the possibility of just a straight up flipping of roles where Sacco takes the power play and Chris Kelly moves to the penalty kill. Like, we'll see if that's what they end up doing, but it feeds into what you guys are talking about of like, yeah, if you know one, then you at least know what that side of it expects, and so you have an idea of what the other side wants to do or should be doing or can do to challenge certain looks. Like, Chris Kelly's been running the power play, but he was a penalty kill specialist during his career as a player, and has obviously been seeing every penalty kill in the league. So like, he would know that. Joe Sacco has scouted in his 11 years as an assistant, has scouted every possible power play look you could ever possibly see. So like, he's going to have plenty of ideas. So like, fresh set of eyes can help. And like, I was also just reminded of Hampus Lindholm before he got injured, when they moved him up to that top power play unit, which only lasted less than a period before he got hurt. I asked him like what he wants to bring up there, and he talked about he's just going to play his game. He's going to be shot first because he had been shooting on the second unit. But then he also said, like, as someone who kills penalties, I know that like one of the hardest things to defend is teams that just get funnel shots in from the point. And he's like, it gets you scrambling. The puck's in your skates. It's, you can't see where it is. And like, you make mistakes, you miss it. And so like, he has that mindset of like, I want to force the other penalty kill to do that. Like, I want to make their defensemen as uncomfortable as I get when teams are just firing away at me.
Bridget and Scott, did you have any final talking points from the game before we move on to some of the Sweeney comments?
Well, just that it was, Lindholm getting his third goal of the Elias Lindholm getting his third goal of the season. It after like not really like fully being called out by Sweeney, so maybe this transitions in anyway. But Sweeney in that press conference did say that Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov are both past the transitional phase of assimilating into the Bruins, and wanted them to start playing better. And you saw Lindholm get the goal. It seemed like it could be maybe a turning point for him just based off his reaction and the team's reaction. I mean, they sellied like that was like an overtime game winner. It was a 1-0 game. So it was nice to see the emotion, because that had been lacking too. And one other thought that I don't think I said this on the podcast, but I said this to you guys behind the scenes. Lindholm looks like you, Brian. Like, he looks like you. Elias Lindholm and you could be like brothers. You could. You disagree.
I don't know if I see that.
Scott said you look like a combination of two people, and I said no, he looks like Brian.
Oh, I that's my first time hearing it. I don't know.
I'm gonna just Scott.
My comparison over the summer was he looks like a combination of Matt Grzelcyk and AJ Greer.
And I said no, he looks like Brian. So
I don't know if I have any Swedish in me, but maybe if the hair is a little bit longer, I can see something. But that's funny.
Yeah, get the flow going. We'll put you side by side.
For playoff time. I'll grow it up for playoff time.
Yeah, and like on Lindholm, it's like that reaction, obviously his reaction, but yeah, also like all the genuine smiles from his teammates that were on the ice. It's like I think guys know, like, obviously they're all feeling pressure. They all want to be better than they've been. They know they have to be. But I think they also recognize that, like, there's more scrutiny on the new guys. Like, again, as much as they want to say they block everything out and they don't hear the noise, they do. Like, they know what people are talking about, and I think they're all aware that, like, those signings are coming under criticism, and people are wondering, like, boy, did they just blow it? And they like both of those guys, and they like Elias Lindholm. Like, he's been a good teammate. That's been part of everything you've heard every stop that he's gone to. You had players in Vancouver after 2 months, like, openly lobbying in the media for the team to re-sign him. Like, they loved him. And they all heard, they all know what he said to the media last weekend when he really was hard on himself and, like, fell on the sword and said, I'm not good enough, and it's hard for my line mates to be good when their center's not good. Like, they all appreciate that, and they know that to an extent it's unfair for Lindholm to put, like, all of that on himself, because they know, like, they also haven't been good enough around him, and it's hard to be great on a new team when no one else around you is great for 20 games. Like, when everyone is struggling, it's really hard for the new guy to be the one to, like, step up and drive the bus, especially because that's not really Elias Lindholm's game. Like, he's always been at his best when he's playing off someone else, and he hasn't really been able to play off someone. Like, they didn't find that chemistry with Pastrnak. He's starting to develop some with Marchand, but, like, that's still coming.
So do you guys think that the Bruins are going to try to just stick with, like, a Sacco, Lindholm, Coyle, 1, 2, 3 down the middle for balance? Because to your point, Scott, they're trying Lindholm with Marchand. If they click, I don't really see them going back to Lindholm, Pastrnak, and Sacco, because then you're taking away from what he's created with Marchand. And I just think, is that something that you think they're going to try doing going forward?
Yeah, I could see them sticking with it for a little while, and I'm pretty sure it was our friend Bruins Network, Anthony, on Twitter. I think he quote tweeted my lines from practice, or and mentioned, like, and I agree. It's like a good approach is to try to find pairs that work, and then, like, figure out the rest from there. So Sacco and Pastrnak, that's one pair. Marchand and Lindholm, get them. That's been fairly promising. See what happens if you keep them together. And then Coyle and Frederick is a known commodity, or I know they both underperformed this year, but in general has been in the past. And then you figure out the third person on each line from there, and you can move some guys around. But I do like that idea. And it doesn't mean, I need to stick with it for the next 10 games. Like, if something's not working, you can still change things up in game. But it does seem like when really nothing else has worked, like, that feels like as good an idea as anything to me right now, is, like, start there and then try to build the rest off of that.
Yeah, and then you plug in, like, Geeky and Johnson and different guys around in with those guys, and Brazo, like, wherever they seem to mesh best, or just continue to. And Johnson, he was scratched yesterday, but, like, he's fit in pretty well, I think, so far in the positions that he's been put in, and he's somebody that you notice doing the right thing pretty much every time he's on the ice. So anyway, yeah, I guess that kind of answers your question, Brian. But before we run out of time, probably want to talk about some of the stuff that went down with the press conference, because there's, just to put an end to, like, probably the last time we're going to talk about some of these things, like Montgomery's contract extension talks that didn't go anywhere, or different things like that we probably won't talk about going forward. So what else stuck out to you from the Sweeney press conference and Sacco press conference about Montgomery, and also some of the other stuff that Sweeney said? Like, everything's on the board, but if you want to start with the Monty stuff, just to put a bow on that.
Well, so there's the first thing that I brought up in the opening shifts, but I kind of, we can touch on that, or we don't have to, because it's more speculative, and I don't even know if it's really relevant at this moment. To your point, Bridge, about the Montgomery thing, and Scott and Bridget, I'm fascinated to hear what you guys think about this. But so we kind of learned, it seems like Monty more or less probably turned down maybe an initial offer. They just couldn't come to an agreement of some type. And I'm trying to remember, where was this Elliot Friedman, Scott, or somebody out there said that, like, it may have been not so much the Bruins not so sure about Montgomery. It was more so it may have been Montgomery not so sure about the Bruins, and that kind of leaves some room for subjectivity. So let's just talk about that. What does that mean?
Yeah. So obviously, one of the quotes from Sweeney on Tuesday that caught people's attention was, he said, we weren't negotiating an extension with Montgomery. We couldn't come to an agreement, and he referenced, like, it takes two sides to get a deal done, and said, just like a player has the right to not accept, like, so does a coach. And I think everyone's initial reaction was like, that sounds like BS, and sounds like he's just covering his ass, and, like, why would Montgomery turn down an extension offer? And obviously there's a lot different, like, the pay could not be what he wants, the years cannot be what he wants. But then Elliot Friedman wrote in his 32 Thoughts column that he said, we may never know the whole story, but that he had heard that perhaps Montgomery was having, I forget his exact wording, I don't have it right in front of me, but was having second thoughts about Boston even before they were having second thoughts about him, which is really interesting. And again, it's like, is that someone just trying to cover their ass now in the wake of it? You're trying to leak it out there of, like, hey, maybe Monty didn't really want to be here, type of thing.
That's hard for me to believe.
I mean, I guess, like, if you had told me that 2 weeks ago, I'd say, yeah, it's hard to believe, but I don't know. I just feel like it's not coming out for no reason, and it makes me think that there's got to at least be something there. And it might be as simple as maybe Montgomery just felt lowballed, or maybe it was like a 1-year extension, and it's like, are you guys serious? Like, I'm not going year to year. Like, give me 3 years, or we don't have a deal.
Yeah,
like, it could have just been that.
That's more what I would think of what could have been happening.
Yeah, or I mean, I don't know. Or did he not like the way the roster was being built? Like, did he feel like it wasn't being built to his style? Does he wonder if, like, the way he wants to play meshes with the way Sweeney envisions the team playing? Like, there's all that stuff too. So there's different things that could go into it, but it is interesting though.
So if it had nothing to do with term or dollar, right, and it was something other than that, before it's something to do with maybe the individuals on the team from a personality standpoint or a mental toughness standpoint, it could be what you just said, Scott. It could be that, and this is something that Sweeney touched on again. Somebody asked him in the availability, and you guys might know who it was, Scott, I think, because you were there. Bridget, I don't know if you were there in person. Were you there in person, Bridget, for the?
No, I had my other job. I took time out of it to listen live and everything, and right after, but yeah.
So somebody asked Sweeney about, is this Bruins roster conducive for the style of play that Montgomery likes to play, which is, shot quality over quantity and puck possession. And, obviously,
I think Mick asked that question. Mick, right, Scott?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was Mick
Colagio. So, if the roster isn't,
you can tell because it would have been the longest question asked.
If the roster can't,
I love
play
Mick.
a style.
I love Mick. He tells stories leading into his question.
If the roster can't play a style that the head coach wants to implement, Well, who's building that roster? To your point, Scott, it's Sweeney. So, and Sweeney admitted as much. He was like, yeah, we probably have to get back to basics more with the way this roster's built, and just getting pucks to net, playing more simple. I know somebody on this podcast wearing a red hat with a little bit less white than the other has been saying that all season, that they need to like probably just simplify the game, and we've all agreed on that part. But that to me indicates that there's a bit of a philosophical difference between maybe the way the coach is trying to coach and the roster that was built for him to do so. The Bruins they said they wanted to get faster, but they went out and got bigger, because they're looking at the Florida Panthers and the St. Louis Blues in 2019, and the Islanders who knocked the Bruins out, and the Hurricanes who knocked the Bruins out, these bigger teams. But the difference here is those teams were big, but they could also skate. And I think I think the Bruins are faster than what they've showed so far this year. Again, team speed is not just foot speed, but anyway, yeah, maybe there's a philosophical difference there. Maybe that's why Montgomery was unsure, to Scott's point.
I don't see it, but we don't need to continue to talk about it. There was one other thing about Monty that I did want to bring up, which was fairly asked, which was, did he lose the room? Because that was a conversation, like that was in the public, like speculation, and he said no. And I don't think that the players, and you could tell by the players' reaction. Scott, you were in the locker room for the player availability portion of the media session on that day. There's no indication that he lost the locker room. That was definitely not the reason for him going. So,
yeah, it's tough. Like I know you guys have heard it too. Like, especially on sports radio the last few days, it's basically like Marchand, McAvoy, Pasternak have been accused of like putting on a show, like acting. Like they're trying to sound contrite, but they didn't actually give a shit, and like they were fine with Montgomery getting fired. And listen, I can't tell people like what opinions to have, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just have the complete wrong feel for the situation. Maybe I'm a sucker for their acting jobs, but I think their emotions were genuine. Like I think they liked Jim Montgomery as a person more than anything. And they knew his family, and like they were close. And I think they were legitimately bummed and felt real guilt over a guy that they liked losing his job. Again, maybe I'm a sucker. Maybe I just can't see through them. But
they're not actors, all right. They're not. They haven't won any Emmys or.
But yeah, Bridget, like to your point, like being in the room that day and seeing, not just the players we talked to, but other players, like it wasn't like everyone's really just like laughing, joking. Like they got more positive energy on Thursday, like, game day, now shifting attention. But like on Tuesday, right? That was the first day we were in there. Oh no, Tuesday was the day off. Wednesday we were in there. No, like it was dour. Like it was pretty, guys were like pretty dejected. Like they went about their business and they practiced, but it wasn't like everyone's just like kind of laughing it off and like, oh well, we're moving on, time to go. Like, no, like guys, again, unless the whole team was acting, like guys were legitimately bummed about it.
No,
I don't think you're a sucker, Scott, and I don't think that they and I do think that every one of those players really likes Jim Montgomery and respects him as a person and as a coach, and like you said, they know his family, and they also know Monty's history of overcoming personal struggles. Like I think they have the utmost respect for him. I think that when you hear people on the radio, take a narrative, that people will go to extremes to, for the obvious reasons of engagement and stuff. But I also think that it's not a black and white situation, because I do think retroactively the Bruins players felt terrible that a good man lost his job. At the same time, I do think consciously or subconsciously, especially going into that Blue Jackets game, they had to have known that anything short of 110% effort all game and 2 points would have gotten that same man fired. And I just don't think that in the moment I didn't see the hair on fire effort that we saw last night. So when people go to extremes and say that, like, they didn't, they're saying one thing, but they don't give a shit. Again, they're going to an extreme, but if retroactively they feel terrible, but if they really had a present in the moment understanding of the gravity of their actions, I just feel like that Columbus game would have been at least played differently. Can't say they would have gotten a win if they played better, but the carelessness with and without the puck, in a moment in time where they have to know that Monty's job is on the line any day now, it's gonna create opportunity for talking heads to say what they said, and the players have themselves to blame for that. And so, it's not black and white. I think they are retroactively upset and feel bad, but they could have done more in the moment, and I don't know why they didn't.
It wasn't just the Columbus game either. Like, there's been
Right.
other times where we're like, oh, this could be, this could be it. And it's because they had the up and then they went back down and the consistency wasn't there. And there were multiple games where it felt like a turning point. And like, oh, okay, yeah, that might be the loss that does it. And those happened probably two, 3 times. That you could have realistically thought it might happen after this. And Sweeney decided to hang on a little longer, see if they could right the ship. And then when it happens like 3 times, and then he loses his job. So obviously it became more of a option as you get further in, but that was definitely not the first time that they had a chance to get things on track and completely put that behind them. And then it just reared back up. And Scott, I think you said this, the Columbus game seemed like it was even worse than the other few times like that they regressed. It had a lot of ugliness to it, and it gets the coach fired.
Yeah, I mean well, I guess we'll see. But in the Montgomery era, that was certainly the rock bottom moment because, like, yeah, Carolina and Dallas were awful. It's like, at least those are really good teams. 0 shots in the third period against Ottawa was awful. You still got a point out of that game. Like, you're right. Like, there were multiple moments like that. And Brian, it's a completely fair point. Like, they left themselves open to any speculation or any takes that anyone wants to have because they didn't do anything to change it. They, for whatever reason, they couldn't get up to play for their coach or for each other. And they kept, every time it seemed like they turned a corner, they couldn't keep it going. So, it opens the door for speculation about how they really felt about Montgomery or how they feel about Swayman, which is the other big talking point on sports radio this week. Like, do I think Bruins players hate Jeremy Swayman? No, I don't. Do I think maybe some of the negotiations and missing camp might have rubbed guys the wrong way, and Swayman maybe felt a little out of the loop when he came back? Like, yeah, I think that might have happened, but I don't think guys are like, I don't think anyone in there is like still holding that against Swayman in that sense, where it's like, oh, like, we're gonna not play in front of Swayman, which I've heard, and it's like, I don't think that's happening. Again, I think it's more, for whatever reason, they've just been incapable of playing well consistently, period, no matter what was going on with the coach or the goalie or anyone else. And now we'll see, maybe the Montgomery's firing is the kick in the ass that they need, and they get their heads on straight and they bring a more consistent effort going forward. Or maybe they no-show in Detroit on Saturday night and we go, I guess, nothing's been fixed.
Well, I mean, I know we're talking about how they bounced back in a game where they had to last night, but they also still only scored 1 goal. And they have to show that they can bring these efforts more consistently. So they are by no means, atoned for their shortcomings so far. But did you guys happen to read Fluto's article? And did you see the language that he used when he said if Swayman's play like continues to struggle, that like he might not have any friends left or something like that. That's pretty strong. And Fluto's a straight up guy.
Yeah, he's not
Has a
a
lot of
very
integrity. Has a lot of
yeah.
integrity to his works. What did you guys make of that? Because that seems a little bit more, Scott, than I hear that, and that seems a little bit more than maybe just kind of like a little bit of hard feelings over the way the summer played out. Like may not have many friends left. That indicates that he already lacks them, and that the ones that he has could be vulnerable. I don't want to read too much into it, but because it's Fluto, I just found that to be very strong language.
Yeah, it is strong, and you're right. Fluto is usually a straight shooter, and he definitely talks to guys. Like, I don't think he just throws things out there. So you have to give it some credence, some credibility, and I do. Like, it caught my attention, and you definitely make a mental note of it. I have not gotten that impression that he's like already lost friends in the room. Like I said, I think the idea that there might be some lingering, if you want to call it hard feelings, or just kind of, I don't know, a little bit uncomfortable of a situation where, okay, he missed all camp and now he's also not performing the way we expect him to. Like, yeah, I think there might be some of that, but I have not gotten any impression that like guys have turned on him, or like, or there's like this like anti-Swayman movement. But definitely an interesting comment from, interesting line from Fluto.
Yeah, and when I put up on Twitter like retweeted the article that I wrote about Korpisalo and Swayman, like, is there a legitimate competition? Like, one of the responses that I got to the tweet was someone that said, "Bridget, is it true that Swayman isn't loved in the locker room anymore?" So this is certainly something that people are wondering about. We do not have an answer to that. We are not in the locker room. I didn't get the sense of it so far, but the access we have is obviously doesn't go that personal. So Fluto does. So if people don't know who Fluto Shinzawa is, he's a writer for the Athletic, and he has quite a bit of access, and he has a lot of resources that the Athletic gives him, and he a lot of times takes the road trips, and a lot of times that's when you actually get a chance to talk to people away from everyone else. And so yeah, he also just like talk about who his personality is. Like, he's very reserved, and he doesn't say anything that he doesn't mean or that isn't accurate. Like, he's very careful. So yeah.
I can definitely see, I can see the reasonings for any like hockey players by nature are kind of, they go under the radar. They're not really the loudest of personalities. So when you're a Bruins player and you've done nothing but, move back to Boston for the year and, get yourself ready for training camp, and you're on the ice, and then off the ice, like, your team's name, your team's logo is kind of being dragged through the mud because, don't forget all this, like, for a Bruins player, like, Swayman has every right in the world to go on a podcast and talk about whatever he wants. But when you bring up ongoing contract negotiations on a public podcast for the media to consume and talk about, it's kind of taboo for the Bruins organization for a player to be talking about an ongoing contract negotiation. And then you add to that, like, the Bruins' initial offer getting leaked out to Spit and Chicklets, and then the Bruins getting shit on by everybody for that when, so then the Bruins feel the need to fight back when they had the chance. All the while, you're Parker Wotherspoon, you're Justin Brazeau, like, you're seeing all this go. It indirectly affects you by association. Then the Amazon series comes out with Swayman right before, like, during all this stuff. There's definitely a bit of an element of, like, I don't want to use the word diva, but like, okay, this individual he's garnering a lot of attention. It's not even like, and we're doing nothing, but we're kind of getting some backlash by association. I can see why players would be like, hey, Elvis, take it down a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, and then you combine that with his poor play to start the year. It just hasn't been a good recipe. So hopefully things turn around, but it makes sense why things have maybe gotten off on the wrong foot.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
we were like running late on time here. Do you guys want to talk about just real quick what's next? You know, like the
First
upcoming-
off, I was just going to mention, like, let's not forget that, you know, it was only 6 months ago that Swayman was the most beloved person in that team because they all knew that without him, they weren't getting to the second round of the playoffs. So
Right, that's true.
he didn't throw away all that goodwill because of some missteps with going public and all that. Like it all gets settled by play. If Swayman starts playing the way he can and is supposed to play, no one's gonna give a shit. Like it'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Okay, well, I'm probably good, guys. If you have any final thoughts before we go.
I was just gonna say, like, next 4 games for the Bruins are they're winnable games, right? Like it's Detroit on the road on Saturday, and then they come back home for Vancouver, go to the Islanders, and then another home game against the Penguins. And the Penguins have not been playing well this year. But those are 4 games that, and we've been saying this for a while, like this is a stretch that you can claw your way back. Like
and also like on the goaltending front, both goalies are going to play a lot because starting so they have the Saturday game in Detroit, and then after that they have a stretch of 6 games in 9 days with 2 back-to-backs in there. Like that's about as compact as I can remember in like a week and a half stretch.
Bridget, can you repeat those next 4 games real quick?
Yeah.
Because then I want to.
Detroit Saturday, and then next week they come back for a back-to-back. The first one's at home Tuesday against Vancouver. The next one's on the road Wednesday against the Islanders, and then they play Pittsburgh on Friday at home.
Okay. So then their first week of December, if you carry it forward to the next 4 games, is Montreal, Detroit, Chicago, and Philly, which that's the stretch Scott just mentioned. But those teams, you're talking about, you know, your next, 10 games or so, 8 to 10 games. Like you get the Winnipeg Jets after that, and then Vancouver again. But yeah, this stretch, when you consider the coaching change, the potential spark from that, if they can play the right way, get feeling good, combine that with the schedule, they should be able to use these next few weeks to get themselves back to where they comfortably should be or wanted to be in the standings at that time of year. So if they don't, to Don Sweeney's comments, heads are going to roll, change will happen. And then, Don Sweeney would be on notice as potentially one of those potentially.
He himself is not safe if that's what happens.
No.
Yeah. And I guess we should also note, like, I think we'll do our regular Monday episode and then maybe one more before Thanksgiving. But obviously, the Thanksgiving holiday I'm going to go ahead and say, like, we're probably not doing an episode next Friday. The Bruins play on Friday anyways, so probably looking at a two episode week next week.
Yeah. And one last plug for me. So if you're watching this on Friday, which is when we're recording, check out This Week in Hockey East. It airs at 6:30 on Nesson every Friday. I record it right here with all my beautiful stuff that you see, in a puck that has Scott's face on it somewhere back there. That is in the show. And then Sunday at 3 p.m. is the broadcast with me and Pierre McGuire at UMass. Nice. So if you don't have anything else to do, we'll watch Sunday afternoon and you're not feeling football, go over to Nesson, watch some college hockey. That should be fun.
I was gonna say 3 o'clock is like my usual checkout time on Patriots games. So that's
if you're not feeling it, just switch over to Nesson.
And speaking of Nesson, I also just want to say real quickly, my current 7th player, Nesson 7th player award winner, actually it goes to you, the fans of the Boston Bruins, for sticking through this god awful product that has been the first month plus of the season and continuing to watch what we've been watching and finally getting rewarded with a fun game on November 21st with a couple of fights, some good hitting, nice, competitive game. So the fans right now are my early 7th player award winner.
It's gonna be like the year that Time Magazine made the Person of the Year you.
Are there write-ins allowed for the? I guess you can put whatever you want, right? It just asks you to fill in a field. It's not like you have to click. I don't know. Write-ins. Go ahead, go for it. Fans win. I don't know. We will see. So anyway, I think that just does it for us today.
Yeah,
right?
No, that's we all got things to do. So thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy Bruins Red Wings on Saturday, and we'll talk to you on Monday. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.